Hi folks, we're Tassless Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car or your truck or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the protests, some of which became riotous in England following the murder of those three girls by a black guy whose parents came from Rwanda, and he, for some reason, just went out and started rando stabbing white people, kids in this case. Anyway, there's a number. This was something that brought matters that were already at a high temperature, brought them to boiling point, and there were protests. Now, instead of dealing with the issue or attempting to address it, because mass migration is absolutely a mandatory part of the globalist project. So anyone that objects to it or questions it or even notices it is an enemy of the globalist project, and thus an enemy of the British government, which is owned and run, administered and instructed by the globalist cabal. So whereas you can murder people and rob and do this and that, that's not a threat to the globalist project. It's irritating, annoying, but it's not a threat to the globalist project. But if you protest mass migration or any manifestation or subset of it, then you are opposed to the globalist project, and they will not tolerate defiance. They will not tolerate, so that the full weight of all the resources of the state and the politicized police, the politicized courts, the politicized prosecutors, all of them will come after you. And they did, and they are in Britain. I mean, same if you look at, say, the riots around the George Floyd thing, where a career criminal died of an overdose and he was dressed up as some evil murder by brutal white police or something. I mean, really? But this was the narrative that the globalists wanted. It was the unrest and disquiet and racial division that the globalists wanted, and so it was allowed to run free, really unchecked. Now, there was much talk about 10,000 people were arrested as participants in those riots, but such a tiny proportion of them were actually charged and imprisoned. Whereas the state, with an absolute laser-like focus, went after people who'd even been in the general vicinity of Washington, D.C. In 2020. So, protesting the flagrantly violated election of 2020. So I just want to have a look at and compare the two there, because again, you see these riots that involved whole, police stations and goodness knows what being burned down, property damage in the gazillions, and yet the state really wasn't very interested in it. But when you look at these people protesting a rigged election, then that's it. All the resources of the state are laser-like focused and directly chasing it. And this is the same here in England. You look at the Black Lives Matter riots in England. Protesters or rioters can tear down public property and destroy it, deface it, burn things down, burn police cars. They can do all sorts of things, provided they're brown and black, and the authorities more or less tolerate it. If you look at the amount of arrests that occur, say where Islamic mobs can run around major cities calling openly for genocide of Jews and things like that, and somehow the authorities just don't care. The police aren't arresting them left, right and centre. And even when they do become riotous and climb all over sort of monuments and so on and deface them and destroy them and graffiti them, police don't really care. They're obviously under instructions not to care, but they sometimes ask, "No, will you pretty please not climb over there?" But if the rioter says, "Well, fuck you," to the officer, then the police don't do anything. And a very small number of people are getting arrested. Also, if you look at the crimes, knife crimes, say in London or elsewhere around Britain, running around with machetes and stabbing people, this sort of thing, the sentences they get are surprisingly light. I'm quite amazed that people can have a running machete battle down the main street, cutting people and so on, and they'll get 18 months in prison or a year. This sort of thing. This is quite remarkable. However, this is in stark contrast with the protesters in northern England recently, nearly all of whom were white and so on. But there's a few things to note here. Reading the judges' sort of reasons for judgment, which happened very quickly. They're sentencing and judging and having the trial almost in a single pass. This is very unusual. If you look at the brown people who are arrested for their knife crimes, it's sometimes they're released on bail and bond and so on, and it can sometimes be, often is, many months before the matter comes to trial, and then months again until they're sentenced. Any time that they've been in prison or detained is then deducted from the sentence, and it's often the case they walk free out of the court. You've done enough time. So these people are not treated as a threat to the state. They may be a threat to the peace, or they may be a threat to the quiet street or something. There may be a threat to that, but that's not a threat to the globalist power. That's not a threat to the state, and it's not a threat to the globalist project. So if they go around killing people, particularly if blacks killing each other, if they go around killing people, stabbing people, macheteing people, okay, well, it's kind of not nice, but it doesn't threaten the globalist project. And this means they're in a different class. So we've now entered a period, I think been in it for some time now, we've entered a period where justice is ideological now. The globalist project is the imperative that the government is tasked with enforcing and implementing, then don't represent the people anymore. The government represents the globalists and the globalist interests and the globalist project. That's their job, to implement and protect the globalist project and to guard it from all criticism and so on. So when people start protesting about mass migration, in this case, because of the effects of it, as in black people running around with machetes or knifing kids and so on, if there's a complaint about it, then you're threatening the globalist project and the treatment will be harsh. And this is something that was noticeable in the thing. As a guy, I think he's like 69 or 70 years old. He's hardly a threat to anybody, but I'm not sure he was even out protesting. I think he was near the protest, and he's an old man, and he's on his medication and everything. And the police gave an order to disperse. Now, I've noticed when they give orders to disperse to brown and black people, the police don't follow it up. They will repeat the request, but they won't bring out the batons and the shields and the horses and the dogs and the riot squads, and they won't do that. They do sometimes, but it's quite rare. And even if they do, they'll stand at a distance, so to avoid provoking the brown or black people. But when there's an order to disperse, it's not enforced. Yet in this instance, they give an order to disperse, and minutes later, they're arresting people who are just nearby. Well, what's the charge? Well, you didn't disperse when we said. What? And so people, I guess, are being dragged into court, and they're being given sentences of 2.5 years, 3 years for not dispersing quickly enough. I mean, are you kidding me? So you can go and chop people up with a machete, you can stab people, and you'll get 12 to 18 months. But if you're an old man, white man, by the way, that doesn't disperse quickly enough, even though you're not even part of the riot or protest, if you don't disperse quickly, you can be arrested and given 3 years in prison. But what's the interesting thing here is the judge, and I've had a look at a few of the judge's reasons for judgment, and they're in my opinion, they are manifestly political judgments. That these people are political prisoners. They've committed, as far as I'm concerned, committed no crime, or if it is, it's a minor misdemeanor. Nothing is terrible and hugely offensive and evilly criminal as, say, putting a hurty tweet online or something. That's the epicenter of evilness. So this is just not dispersing quickly enough. Now, the sentencing judge, this is one here, and I'm paraphrasing it, but says to one guy, this guy's in his 60s, you have no criminal record, you've never, unknown to the police, and you have, you've been well-behaved pillar of society, in effect. But it's because you've been such a well-behaved, law-abiding citizen that I'm being heavy-handed with you now, just to show you that if you step out of line, you're in fucking trouble. But if you're a career criminal, sort of a seasoned machete chopper-upper, then, well, the police know you anyway. I mean, you've been in trouble so often with the police, so we'll only give you a light sentence because, hey, yeah. But if it's an ideological crime that is opposing in some way the globalist project, then that's it. Biffo, bammo, you're in big trouble, dude. So, and this is the case with other ones. There's an old lady who's been arrested and sentenced, and other older people who, and it's clear that it's an ideological thing. You're a law-abiding, well-behaved citizen that is disagreeing with something that we, go back to being well-behaved, because the only way the globalist project is going to be put in place if the well-behaved people like you from the high trust era of the British society, it's only if people like you don't do anything. We have to be able to scare and intimidate you. The black and the brown people, but you are the people that will be the main threat to the globalist project, and it's you we want. It's your scalps we want to take. So this is very sinister in my view, because it doesn't only, not indicate, prove, in my opinion at least, prove the politicization of the law, of the courts, of the police and the prosecutors, the total politicization, by the way, of those areas of government. But it also indicates that the judges know that these white people are the biggest threat to globalization, and the judges are actually tasked with the specific job of, you must protect the globalist project, and sentence these people harshly. And so they're direct globalist employees. And I mean, are they declaring that conflict of interest? I don't think so. They're pretending to be good, independent, impartial British judges, and they're not. They're far from it. The opposite of that, I would argue. So I just want to make one sort of final mention about the separation of powers, because I think it's going to now come back into being as big an issue as it was in the days of Oliver Cromwell. And what the separation of powers is really an understanding more than an actual law. But the separation of powers came about not totally a result of, but part of a result of when Oliver Cromwell heavied the Privy Councillors, who were like, if you like, the apex of the law in England at the time. He heavied them to declare the king guilty of treason or whatever it was, the English king, King Charles I, and if found guilty, then they'd have to chop his head off, which they did. And this wasn't well thought of. This idea that you can just twist the arm of the most senior legal people to get them to make a judicial decision without the evidence being in support of it. Now, Cromwell was quite reasonably, by the way, concerned that because England was Protestant at the time, and the Catholics were always desperate to get back in there and establish Catholicism as the main religion again. And Cromwell was concerned that if the king stayed alive, there would always be Catholic military and political plots to put him back on the throne. So only when he was dead would those plots stop, because there would be no immediate Catholic rallying point to come around. So in the real politic of the day, you can understand Cromwell's decision. But nonetheless, he perverted the course of justice in order to get that outcome. Now, what the thinkers, the political and legal thinkers of the day in England subsequently decided, and this up to the time and even beyond the Glorious Revolution of 1688, was this idea that when a particular government, a particular persuasion or monarch or anybody comes into power, then they love the idea of legitimizing their evilness. So they want to use the courts to go after the people they don't like. and that kind of makes it. Well, it was heard in a court of law that the judge said. I mean, so what's wrong? It wasn't me. The judge did it. So that's the kind of lies that they tell, which is happening today. We didn't call you a Nazi. It was them. We're only repeating what they said. But if you retweet something bad, you can go to prison. Why? If you repeat Nazi that someone else said, why don't you go to prison? Different. So when particularly at times of, say, civil war or turmoil, different folks would come into power, have influence over the courts at any given time. They would use that influence to get the courts to convict that guy. But there's no evidence. Who gives a fuck? Convict him, for fuck's sake. So it would be that type of scenario. So it was decided by sort of wide consensus that we really need to have completely impartial judges who rely on the evidence and the rule of law and due legal process, the rules of evidence, and that judges make those decisions without being politically influenced or intimidated or threatened or bribed or otherwise rewarded for doing what the people in power at the time want them to do. Now, this was absolutely important, and something was taken up quite seriously by the founding fathers in the United States, that the court should be separate. There in the United States is more enshrined in actual law and constitutional documentation, but in Britain it was more, not that there weren't laws in and out, but it was more an understanding and an agreement. So now that's all been thrown out the window now, that the people in power are the globalist goons, and they are ruthlessly using the police and the courts and the prosecutors to go after people who are against or question or could be viewed as mobilizing any support against the globalist project. And in so doing, they've thrown out the window the separation of powers. Now, but what if people who are anti-globalist get into a position of power? Should all those that did these things, should all they all be rounded up and just arbitrarily thrown in prison? That's a sobering thought. And I think it'll take that sort of situation before these other people, let's go back to an independent court. Let's go back to impartial judges. Because when they're threatened, that's what they'll want. And I find that where any people, especially ideological fanatics, they're prepared to cut down and remove any law when it suits them. And if they think they're going after the people they don't like, but when that turns back on them, then suddenly, the law, don't hurt me, the law, the judge, and my rights, and where's my lawyer? And suddenly it's very different. All the rights that they're prepared to disregard and trample upon suddenly become very important, but only when it's them who are in the firing line. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.